This is one of the most bizarre stories we have ever covered. A story about a man, a father and a grandfather who was driven by so much greed and lust that he planned his youngest son's murder. Join us today as we unpack the case of Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini, the Nyeri billionaire who orchestrated the brutal murder of his son, Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu, over money and his wife. Welcome to Silent Shadows. As always, if you appreciate our true crime storytelling, support our fortnightly series by liking and subscribing. Together we uncover compelling tales of crimes and mysteries in Kenya and beyond, presenting well-balanced narratives that respect the victims and their loved ones. Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini lived in Moyogo village in Mwega, Nyeri County. This small agricultural village is known for its expansive farmlands, where local farmers cultivate various food crops like potatoes and maize for commercial purposes. However, none of the other farmers in the area matched the wealth of Wang'ondu, who had built an empire valued at billions of Kenyan shillings through various businesses, which included commercial tea and banana farming, as well as fish farming on his 100-acre property, which was so large that it even had its own dam. Additionally, through his limited company called Tesco, he also invested in other businesses across Nyeri County, including a restaurant, several petrol stations, commercial and residential buildings, wholesale shops, and a stone crushing quarry along the nyeri-nyahururu road. Beyond his immense wealth, Wang'ondu was blessed with a large family. He was married to 2 wives, Beatrice and Scholastica Wang'ondu, and together they had 9 children, 6 sons and 3 daughters. Sadly, tragedy fast-tracked the seemingly idyllic Wang'ondu family in 1995 when their 18-year-old son, Emmanuel Thoita Wang'ondu, a Form 3 student at Kiaganja Secondary School in Nyeri, mysteriously drowned in the dam on their property. During this time, the youngest in the family, Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu, born on 21st March 1988 to the wealthy businessman, and his wife Scholastica, was just 7 years old. As the youngest of 9 children, Daniel was his father's favorite, according to his siblings. Just like his father, Daniel was passionate about business, and after he completed high school at Nyahururu Highway Senior Academy in 2005, he enrolled at the United States International University, popularly known as USIU, the following year. At the university, he pursued a Bachelor of Science in International Business Administration with a concentration in international marketing, and he would go on to graduate in 2009. Although his parents had separated around 2007, Daniel remained very close to his father and continued to live at the family home in Mwega. And even after his graduation in 2009, he began working as a station manager at his father's petrol station, Tesco service station, located at the bustling Gakere Road in Nyeri. On the side, Daniel ran several ventures of his own, including a farming business, a petrol station, a dog breeding enterprise, and a nightclub called the Barcode, also located along the Nyeri-Nyahururu Highway. Daniel was not only a successful businessman, but he was also a devoted family man. He was married to Frida Njeri, and together they welcomed their first daughter in 2015 and their second daughter in 2019. As a loving and attentive father, Daniel cherished both of his daughters, and he ensured they were well provided for, including having a roof over their head. As such, Daniel built a rustic bungalow for his family on his father's expansive farm. Although Daniel and his father lived on the same property, their homes were about 300 meters apart and were separated by individual gates and compounds. Tragically, it was outside his home that Daniel would be brutally killed on Friday, 1st January 2021. The events leading to Daniel's murder began in late 2020 when his marriage to Frida started to fall apart. Specifically, in November of 2020, Daniel and Frida had a very heated argument. After Daniel left for work, Frida called her father-in-law, Stephen Wang'ondu, who then went and locked up Daniel's house with 2 padlocks. Subsequently, Frida and her 2 daughters went to seek refuge in Wang'ondu's mansion. This created a huge rift between Daniel, his father, and his wife. Daniel's and his father's relationship further deteriorated in early December of the same year when Daniel and Frida separated again. Following the separation, Frida moved to her father-in-law's home, where Wang'ondu provided her with a house next to his home and planned to start a business for her. Daniel was furious. He believed his father had stolen his wife, and he confronted him about housing his wife, but Wang'ondu threatened to throw him off the property if he continued to press the issue. A few days later, just 2 weeks before his death, Daniel confronted both his father and his wife Frida at one of the tycoon's petrol stations in Mwanga town. Daniel was so livid that he attacked his father physically and had to be pulled away by bystanders. As he was being restrained by the bystanders, he screamed to be released, vowing to kill his father and then take his own life because of his father's betrayal. After this altercation, Wang'ondu felt so belittled and embarrassed by Daniel's actions of washing their family's dirty linen in public. And this was when he began to plot his own son's murder. The tycoon turned to his driver and personal assistant James Mahinda to help him find a few strong young men to punish his son being caught for killing him. To persuade Mahinda into buying into his sinister plan, Wang'ondu promised Mahinda a large piece of land in his vast estate in Mwanga and promised to pay the young men Mahinda would get to do the job 160,000 Kenyan shillings. You might wonder why Wang'ondu turned to his driver and personal assistant, James Mahinda, with such a sinister request. The thing is, Mahinda had been eating from the rich man's table for a number of years, and he had become Wang'ondu's close confidant. Mahinda began working for the Wang'ondu family in 2013 as their farm manager. He held this role for 2 years before leaving to start a business with his wife, Charity Nyawera. Things would change in November of 2019 when Mahinda returned to work for the tycoon's family after much persuasion from Wang'ondu. This time, he worked as Wang'ondu's driver and property manager, and he even allegedly had access to some of his bank accounts. Wang'ondu also did everything to ensure his number one employee was well taken care of, including giving him a house and a farm to plant some food crops in his family estate. Since Mahinda was Wang'ondu's personal assistant and essentially had the tycoon's ear, this meant that the businessman's 8 children, including Daniel, often had to go through Mahinda to reach their father. This power dynamic did not sit well with Daniel. The situation was so bad that Daniel physically fought Mahinda on several occasions, questioning his motive of being too close to his father and his wealth. This means that while the prospect of receiving a large piece of land from Wang'ondu might have been enough motivation for Mahinda to hire hitmen to kill his boss's son, his previous altercations with Daniel suggest he also had a personal vendetta, and in a way, Mahinda would find his own vindication through Wang'ondu's decision to kill his son. To set the plan to kill Daniel in motion, Wang'ondu handed Mahinda 20,000 Kenyan shillings for him to start looking for hitmen. Mahinda wasted no time, and on Tuesday, 29th December 2020, he reached out to his longtime friend, Geoffrey Warutumo, a Mogoka seller in Embu town, asking him to find 3 strong men for a job of disciplining unruly workers at his boss's quarry. This ask did not make sense to Warutumo, and he was hesitant to help Mahinda at first. And this prompted Mahinda to travel to Embu town the next day, Wednesday, 30th December 2020, to persuade him in person. After some convincing, Warutumo agreed to find Mahinda men for the job he had, and he contacted one Eddie Kariuki, one of his customers who was looking for work. Excited by the opportunity, Eddie rushed to Warutumo's shop and met with Mahinda. At the shop, Mahinda revealed to Eddie the true nature of the job, that it was a murder for hire to kill his boss's son, Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu. To entice Eddie into taking the job, Mahinda told him that he would be paid 100,000 Kenyan shillings. What Mahinda failed to mention was that his boss, Wang'ondu, had actually promised 160,000 Kenyan shillings for the job. But Mahinda, driven by greed, intended to keep the 60,000 Kenyan shillings difference for himself. While Mahinda and Eddie plotted to take an innocent man's life, Warutumo was inside his shop, tending to customers, completely unaware of their evil plans. Eddie agreed to the murder-for-hire scheme and called his friend, Raphael Washira, to inform him about the money-making opportunity. Washira, who was also desperate to make some quick money, got on board the evil plans of eliminating Daniel. 2 days later, this was on Thursday, 31st December 2020, Eddie contacted Mahinda to confirm they were ready to proceed with their plan to kill Daniel and that they would be arriving in Nyeri in a few hours. Before boarding a matatu to Nyeri, Eddie and Raphael passed by Warutumo's Muguka shop to bid him farewell and thank him for connecting them with a job. When the two arrived in Nyeri town, Mahinda met them and they had lunch at a local restaurant where they finalized their plans to kill Daniel. After breaking bread, they traveled to Moyogo village in Mwega, where Mahinda showed Eddie and Washira Daniel's home, which was the location they planned to ambush him at. From there, they went to Mwega town, where Mahinda showed them from a distance their target, Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu. Satisfied with the arrangements, Eddie and Washira instructed Mahinda to buy them gloves and a metal rod for the job. Mahinda heeded to their request and purchased the gloves from a nearby agrovet and the metal rod worth 150 Kenyan shillings from a local hardware store. He then gave the two men 500 Kenyan shillings for supper and left to go meet with his boss. After leaving Eddie and Washira in Mwega town, Mahinda headed to Wang'ondu's quarry. At the quarry, he updated his boss on the progress of the plan to assassinate his son. Wang'ondu was reportedly pleased with the update and instructed Mahinda to keep his Prado after dropping him off at home after work and to use it for transporting Eddie and Washira from the murder scene once they had completed the job. As night fell, Mahinda dropped Wang'ondu off at his home around 5:30 p.m. and he returned to Mwega town, where he waited for a call from Eddie and Washira to pick them up after they had killed Daniel. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Mwangi was celebrating New Year's Eve, completely unaware that his father had orchestrated a plan for his life to end that night. After ushering in the new year at a party with friends in Mwega town, Daniel headed home. Around 1 a.m., he arrived at his gate, but since he was alone and he had no watchman, he exited his car and jumped over the perimeter fence to unlock the gate from the inside. All this while, Eddie and Washira lay hidden in the bushes observing him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Once Daniel had parked his car inside the compound, he stepped out of the car again, this time to go close the gate. This was when Eddie and Washira ambushed him. They struck him on the head with a metal rod and repeatedly stabbed him, leaving him deceased beside his car. Back in Mwega town, Mahinda, Wang'ondu's driver, grew tired of waiting for Eddie and Washira to call him as they had promised, and he went home to sleep. Eddie eventually called him on New Year's Day, 1st January 2021, at around 5:30 a.m., informing him that they had completed the job hours earlier and were now in Mwega town waiting to be paid. Mahinda met them at the town and using Wang'ondu's Prado, he drove them to a hideout in Kamatongu, still in Nyeri. After dropping Eddie and Washira off at Kamatongu, Mahinda went back to collect their payment from his boss and deliver the news that the murder mission had been successful. When he arrived at Wang'ondu's house, Mahinda reported that Wang'ondu was very happy with his son's death and handed him 160,000 Kenyan shillings in cash to pay Eddie and Washira for a job well done. As the blood money was exchanging hands between Wang'ondu and Mahinda in the tycoon's compound, Daniel was still lying dead in a pool of blood a few meters away yet to be discovered deceased. As Mahinda left his boss's home, he took Wang'ondu, Daniel's wife Frida, and another woman with him. He dropped Wang'ondu and Frida at his petrol station in Mwega town, and then took the other woman to the quarry. Afterward, he headed back to Kamatongo to meet Eddie and Wachira. Mahinda picked up Eddie and Wachira from their hideout in Kamatongo and drove them to Nyeri town. There, he paid them 100,000 Kenyan shillings, and he kept the remaining amount for himself. Of the 100,000 Kenyan shillings Eddie and Wachira received, they gave Mahinda 8,000 Kenyan shillings to pass on to his friend Warutumo as a token of appreciation for referring them to the job. But Mahinda, being Mahinda, greedy and selfish, he kept half of the money and gave Warutumo 4,000 Kenyan shillings only. During this time, Mahinda, Eddie and Wachira were dividing their spoils. Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu was discovered dead next to his red Volkswagen Golf. Workers from his father's farm and neighbors who were at the murder scene found the 32-year-old father of two lying in a pool of blood, having suffered multiple stab wounds and a blow to the forehead from a heavy object. Despite the brutality of the attack, nothing appeared to have been stolen. Daniel's phone lay a few meters away. His wallet was untouched. His house was still locked, and although the car door was open, it had not been damaged. This raised suspicions among the locals and later the police that Daniel's death was likely a murder-for-hire killing. Wang'ondu arrived at the murder scene from his petrol station in Mwega town shortly after Daniel was found deceased. According to the people at the scene, it was quite odd that he did not seem upset by his son's death. As folks waited for the police to arrive and process the scene of the crime, Wang'ondu made a call to his driver, Mahinda, instructing him to go pick Daniel's grandfather, Joakim Wambugu, from his home in Emberingo, Kieni West, and take him to Daniel's home. By the time Mahinda arrived at Daniel's home with his grandfather, Daniel's body had already been moved to the morgue at Nyeri Referral Hospital, and the police were processing the crime scene. As for Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini, Daniel's father, he was at his house, receiving condolences from family and friends. Little did everyone know that he was the mastermind behind Daniel's brutal murder. The news of Daniel's death spread like wildfire, and social media was flooded with messages of grief and love from Daniel's family, friends and neighbors who remembered him as a kind and down-to-earth man, and they called for the police to bring his killers to justice. Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu was buried in his compound in Moyogo village in Mwega on Wednesday, 6th January 2021, 5 days after his life was callously cut short by his own father. Barely a week after the burial, while the flowers on Daniel's grave were still fresh, Wang'ondu began processing the compensation from his son's life insurance policy, for which he had been paying premiums for. As Wang'ondu was looking forward to a huge payday from the insurance company, Eddie and Wachira were enjoying the blood money in Embu. Eddie built a modest 2-room house in his village, and Wachira treated himself to new household items. At the same time, the police in Nyeri were diligently working to solve the mystery behind Daniel's death. They even enlisted the help of the DCI, who pursued the lead that his death was a contract killing, since nothing had been stolen from the crime scene. And as they started gathering information about Daniel from relatives and Mwega residents, they learnt about Daniel's altercation with his father over his wife, Frida Njeri. This led the investigators to suspect that Stephen Wang'ondu may have been involved in his son's murder. By early February 2021, nearly 2 months after Daniel's gruesome killing, the police were closing in on his killers. Sensing this, Mahinda, one of the accomplices, called his friend Warutumo and told him to instruct Eddie and Wachira to switch off their phones and to tell no one about the job they had done. Mahinda then fled Mwega, leaving his family behind, and he went into hiding in Githurai Kimbo. Mahinda's sudden disappearance from Mwega only heightened police suspicions that he was involved in Daniel's murder. And on Saturday, 20th February 2021, the detectives tracked him down at his hideout in Githurai, Kimbo, and arrested him. Upon his arrest, Mahinda sang like a radio with new batteries, confessing to the murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by his boss. That same day, police arrested his wife, Charity Nyawira, on suspicion of aiding and abetting Daniel's murder, along with 75-year-old Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini. The following day, Sunday, 21st February 2021, the police nabbed Eddie Kariuki and Geoffrey Warutumo in Matakani, Embu. Raphael Washira, the sixth suspect, who along with Eddie killed Daniel, was later arrested on Tuesday, 25th February 2021 at his uncle's house in Pipeline, where he had been hiding. Following the arrests, protests erupted in Muiga with Muiga residents who knew the Wang'ondu family well, demanding justice for Daniel and calling for the town's wealthiest man, Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini, and his driver, Mahinda, to be denied bail. The protesters argued that they could not coexist with cold-blooded murderers in the same town.
Tumeenda chini, hatujaona mtu ameshikwa, but to hear the father participated in this, it really, to us, it's so painful to lose a friend. For me, he was a friend and a customer, and I feel, even today, I feel the loss of Mwangi in my life.
Wakazi hao wanasema kuwa wanataka haki itendeke kesho pale washukiwa watapofikishwa mahakamani.
When it was reported that wameshika waliohusika na kifo cha Mwangi, tunataka kushukuru Mungu na kuwashukuru, and kesho wanarudishwa kule kotini, and all we can say ni justice be served.
Tomorrow we are appealing to the government and to the judiciary not to grant him bail, because when he is granted that bail, he will be a threat to the community, and our security will be threatened.
The protests also surfaced two things. Firstly, that Daniel was deeply loved and respected by the people of Muiga. And secondly, there was a deep-seated dislike for the town's richest man, Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini. However, the hostility towards him wasn't solely because Wang'ondu had killed his son. As Muiga's richest man, Wang'ondu had had a strained relationship with the town's residents for decades. Social media posts by Muiga residents pointed to various reasons for this resentment. Some of the residents recalled how he valued money above all else, with some of them recounting that while growing up in Muiga, they were wont to avoid Wang'ondu's estate due to persistent conspiracy theories that he was a devil worshipper. Additionally, according to news archives, Wang'ondu's stone crushing quarry, which opened in a residential area of Muiga in 2015, had long been a source of contention between the tycoon and the local residents, to the extent that they even took him to court, claiming that the activities of the quarry had caused adverse effects to their health and the environment.
December 2018, operations at this quarry crusher belonging to Stesco Company was stopped following a directive by the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA. The closure was preceded by a series of incessant complaints from locals who made serious allegations against the company with regards to environmental degradation.
Hii crusher ni shida kwetu sisi, na tena shida kwa watoto wetu na wamama wakogo kama hao unaona hapa.
KTN News has since established the actual position that surrounds the impasse, pitting residents of this village and Stesco service station owned by one Stephen Kenini Wang'ondu. During the meeting in which orders for closure of operations were made, officials from the National Environment Management Authority, the National Environment Complaints Committee, and officers from the National Government Administration were present while allegations against Stesco were being made. Among other things, the residents pointed out dust emission and vibrations, with some attributing the deaths of their kin to the operations at the
6 murder suspects, Stephen, Mahinda, his wife Charity, Warutumo, Eddie, and Washira, were arraigned at the Nyeri Law Court On Friday, 26 February 2021, the judge ruled that the suspects would remain in custody for 5 more days to allow the detectives to complete the investigations. Charity would be released from custody during this period after the police determined that although her husband had used her phone to communicate with Warutumo, Eddie and Wachira, she was not involved in the planning or execution of Daniel's murder. The detectives also began investigating the life insurance policies taken out by Stephen Wang'ondu. Shockingly, they discovered that he had taken out life insurance policies on family members, relatives, friends, and his employees, paying all the premiums himself. Mahinda also confirmed that just days after Daniel's death, he had driven his boss to the insurance office, where Wang'ondu submitted a claim for his son's life insurance payout. It was puzzling why a billionaire would desperately need money from his son's life insurance policy payout. From interviews with Wang'ondu's relatives, investigating officers soon learned that the businessman had been struggling to keep his numerous businesses afloat since 2019, and even 2 of his prime properties in Muiga had been auctioned off in May of 2020. Following these interviews, the detectives also suspected that this was not the first time Wang'ondu had killed one of his sons for insurance money. They postulated that his first victim was Emmanuel Wang'ondu, his 18-year-old son, who had been found deceased in the dam on his farm in 1995. The detectives' investigations further uncovered that after Emmanuel's death, Wang'ondu received a substantial insurance payout, and later that year he opened a petrol station in Muiga, naming it Emmanuel Muiga Service Station in his late son's honor. Therefore, the detectives were convinced that beyond the struggle between Wang'ondu and Daniel over Daniel's wife Frida, the motive behind Wang'ondu killing his son was also the life insurance payout. As for the 2 hitmen, Eddie and Raphael, the police were able to pin them to Daniel's murder through the forensic evidence collected at the crime scene and the cell phone tower data, which confirmed that they were in the vicinity of Daniel's home at the time of the murder. Once the police concluded the investigations, they were certain that the suspects would be charged with murder. In a karmic turn of events, Wang'ondu, the mastermind behind his son's tragic death, would not live long enough to see his day in court. You see, when Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini was remanded at Kingongo Maximum Prison in Nyeri, the 75-year-old, who had been hypertensive and diabetic since 2008, fell sick, and he was in and out of the hospital in the weeks that followed, which meant that he missed most of the court hearings. Specifically, on Wednesday, 28 April 2021, when Justice Florence Mushemi ruled to release the 5 suspects, including Stephen Wang'ondu, on a 1 million bond, the tycoon was at Mount Kenya Sub-County Hospital in Nyeri, receiving treatment for the COVID-19 virus. Almost a week later, on Wednesday, 5th May 2021, he was transferred to Outspan Hospital, also in Nyeri, where he passed away 2 days later, on 7 p.m., on Friday, 7th May 2021, just 5 months after planning his own son's murder. Stephen Wang'ondu Kenini was buried a week later in a very private ceremony in his farm in Muiga, with the mastermind behind Daniel's murder now deceased, the tycoon's former driver and personal assistant, James Mahinda, signed a plea bargain with the prosecution. By signing the plea bargain, Mahinda agreed to testify against Eddie and Wachira, and he also pleaded guilty to a charge of negligent homicide, and he was sentenced to 2 years in prison and 1 year of probation. For Geoffrey Warutumo, the Muguka seller, who had helped Mahinda find Daniel's killers, also became a state witness. However, the prosecution dropped all charges against him, as the investigations had established that he was not involved in the planning and execution of Daniel's murder. According to the prosecution, Warutumo was not even aware of the murder-for-hire plans. Although both Mahinda and Warutumo were prepared to testify against Eddie and Wachira, the two killers' cases did not go to trial because Eddie Kariuki and Raphael Wachira pleaded guilty on Thursday, 28 September 2021, to taking Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu's life. This plea came after they signed an agreement with the prosecution, where the prosecution agreed to remove the death sentence from the table in exchange for the guilty plea. As a result, on Thursday, 20th June 2024, Eddie Kariuki was sentenced to 25 years in prison, while Raphael Wachira received a 30-year sentence. The judge who passed the sentence, Judge Kizito Magare, noted that Eddie would serve less time because he had shown remorse for his actions, whilst his counterpart Wachira had failed to show any remorse for gruesomely taking Daniel's life. I kid you not, the judge also added that unlike Eddie, there were no family members who would miss Wachira, since he was 36-year-old and single. We extend our heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of Daniel Mwangi Wang'ondu. May his soul continue to rest in eternal peace. Thank you for joining us today. If you appreciated this video, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to be notified when the next video is up. Until then, please take care, stay safe, and always trust your gut.